Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had someone ask a question in the comments yesterday, and they basically wanted to know, why is it that old school lifters seem to get stronger, so much easier than guys today? That even bodybuilders, so a lot of your bodybuilding greats from the 50s and 60s were squatting 500, 600 pounds, deadlifting 600, 700 pounds. A lot of these guys were able to strict overhead press well over 200 pounds for work sets. Some of these guys were benching 400 and 500 pounds, and this was before steroids became really prolific. And so there was like, why are these guys so damn strong compared to today? And the funny part is that I think the answer is very, very obvious, but because of modern ideas that people have false ideas about training, they don't get it. And some of it should be very obvious, and I want you to step back and realize it. They didn't have access to the variety of training equipment we have today. In other words, the concept of being able to try to isolate a muscle wasn't something they really and truly had a lot of access to, because a lot of them had nothing but barbells, because Olympic lifting and things like that, which is what's called weightlifting and still is called weightlifting, kind of dominated training. And the same thing for sports training. If anyone lifted weights to get stronger at sports, that's what they had access to. We didn't have nearly as many sorts of even racks that we have today. Machines were non-existent. Arthur Jones invented machines, the creator of HIIT, right? That's where all of your weightlifting machines came from. They didn't even have oftentimes cables or anything. These guys had big, heavy barbells. And let me ask you a question. If you had to go to the gym and all you had access to was some rubber mats, an Olympic barbell, and a bunch of plates, how strong do you think you could get? In other words, if you started saying, hey man, I want to work this muscle and this muscle, what would you have to do that? You don't have any way to sit down. You have almost nothing you can do laying down. So let's say you wanted to do stuff, man, you're going to have to learn to power clean everything up. How strong do you think you're going to get if you have to power clean every time you go to the gym? And back then, guys usually trained about 3 days a week, so they had a day off. So let's say you wanted to do some squats, because you realize, well, I want to do more than deadlift. Deadlifting's easy. Come in and deadlift all the time. Because you got a barbell on the floor, you can deadlift. What if you want to do some squats? You're going to have to front squat and power clean. Now, I'm not saying some guys didn't have access to squat racks, but if you had to be inventive, and this is what a lot of people started with, it's what some facilities had back in the day, is had barbells. Well, if you wanted to front squat, you're going to have to learn to power clean that weight up and then do front squats. If you want to do overhead press, you're going to have to clean that weight up and do overhead presses, push presses, clean and jerks, or snatch the weight up. So they did a lot of Olympic lifting, a lot of power snatches, power cleans, push presses. Train your chest. What do you got? Well, you got overhead press, and you're going to have to floor press. You have to get up under that bar, and you're going to have to floor press, which means you're going to have to press from a dead stop on every rep. You could do barbell rows. You could do upright rows. If you wanted to curl just to isolate your biceps, you're going to have to pick it up off the ground. And as silly as that sounds, that starts to add up. Because look how many guys today do stuff out of a rack even. They'll set up out of a rack, they'll get in a preacher bench. If you wanted to try to isolate your triceps, you're going to have to clean it up and do like a standing tricep extension. All right, if that's the only environment you have to train in and you're in there trying to get really big, but even to do anything remotely you would consider hypertrophy work, you're going to have to be lugging big heavy weight around off the floor. How strong do you think you would get relative to the average gym goer today if that's what you had to do to lift weights? You don't have anything you can lay down on, sit down on. You don't have all these benches. You don't have any machines. You don't have any cables. What are you going to do? And some of these guys had a squat stand. And eventually power racks came around. Eventually benches were created to do the bench press on, but they had to floor press. And then, obviously they had bars and stuff where they could do weighted body weight exercises. Well, even then, you can do weighted pull-ups, weighted chin-ups, weighted dips. How strong do you think a person could get in that environment where you're having to clean stuff up and everything is barbell work? And the vast majority of the exercises you did, you had to do standing. You didn't have a way to sit. You didn't have a machine to pull on. How much stronger do you think you would get? And if this is how you had to train month after month, year after year, How strong do you honestly think you would get after 4 or 5 years of this? Right? You would be a hell of a lot stronger than the average guy who's just a regular gym rat today. Because these guys have access to ways to make this stuff easier. They have ways to isolate muscles and show muscles that don't require them to get strong, because they don't got to clean the weight up all the time. Right? They don't have to do all this full body stuff just to train their arms. Therefore, guys can train their arms and their side delts and their pecs without having to hoist a big heavy weight off the ground. Therefore, guys are weaker today. They're dramatically weaker. And this is the big problem. Everyone's got this idea too of how do people get strong today? Well, when you stall on the bench press, we do a bunch of accessory movements. They didn't have access to all that. They didn't have as much accessory stuff available. If a guy's bench press stalled and he couldn't get his bench press up, usually they just did more bench pressing because, well, do more bench pressing, you'll improve at it. Well, if they stalled too much on that, they might have to do some weighted dips or some overhead pressing to get their bench press up. How much stronger you think overhead pressing and dips are going to make you versus finding some dumbbell exercises to do? Or, some speed work with bands, or whatever else that people come up with to do, right? There's a dramatic difference. But these guys all had to do heavy work off the floor because that's mostly what they had available. They had to do a lot of cleaning. They did a lot of overhead pressing. They did a lot of heavy work standing on their feet, sometimes just to get their basic exercises done. That builds people who are dramatically stronger. They're going to be dramatically stronger. They didn't have a choice. It was their equipment dictated this. In the modern gym environment, we've created an environment where people can train without getting strong, without taxing their entire body. And it's full body training itself that makes you strong. That's what makes you really strong, when you train your body to have to perform as one unit. And these guys had to do huge amounts of work capacity to get anything done. They didn't have access to all the little fluff and pump that we have today and lazy ways to train, so they had to get stronger, so they did get stronger. They didn't have a choice. We have a choice today, and that choice is actually detrimental. I think that's the biggest reason we see so many weak people in gyms, because they can come to a gym and pretend like they're training hard and huff and puff and grunt while they do a bunch of isolation movements or machine work, and honestly think that they're getting the same amount of work these guys did. These guys didn't have a choice. So of course they were stronger. Now, we could look at nutrition also and the same thing. These guys ate. They weren't afraid to eat because they weren't afraid of losing their razor abs. And when they needed to get leaner, they got leaner. But even bodybuilders back in the 50s and 60s, they didn't get ripped. They didn't get ripped. So therefore, these guys ate a lot of food relative to their body weight, and they usually had pretty high training volumes. They burned more calories. They ate more calories. And they just had access to more whole food. How many guys today do you see again, if it just fits your macros and I can eat these Pop-Tarts and junk food? Compare that to these guys. These guys ate steak and potatoes, right? That was their bulking food. And their food was way, way cheaper. The only reason some people don't eat that way could be budget constraints. But here's a question I would ask most of you. If you had to look at it from a budget perspective and you had access to a free gym instead of having to pay your gym membership, where you couldn't use extra accessories and all you had was maybe a squat stand, Olympic bars, and unlimited plates, and that's what you had to train with, but you didn't have to pay for it, how much stronger would you get? And if you were told you couldn't buy any supplements or eat Pop-Tarts or junk food, but you were given unlimited steak and potatoes that you didn't have to pay for, you got free steak and potatoes, unlimited amounts. Because again, the food was a hell of a lot cheaper back then. This stuff was not expensive. A lot of these guys ate 2 pounds of steak every day because it was inexpensive. Nice lean cuts of steak. If that's what you ate day in and day out because you didn't have to pay for it what we pay for food today, and therefore you didn't resort to eating other junk food and feel the need to take all these other supplements and other things, how much bigger and stronger do you think you would be, particularly strength-wise? And if you weren't worried about your razor sharp abs and trying to maintain 9% body fat year round, again, how much stronger do you think you would be? The answer is really, really obvious as to why these guys were so strong 50, 60 years ago. It's not silly nonsense of, they had higher testosterone levels. No. They had access to more food because food was cheaper for quality food, and they only had access to the basics. And when you can only do the basics and you don't have access to variety just because you get some exercise ADHD and you're forced to hoist big heavy weights off the ground to do any training, you are going to get strong as hell. It's unavoidable. Pretty straightforward, guys. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.